What if I told you that it wasn't too late to change your story? And it all begins with the way that you see yourself in your story. Here's a question for you. What is the story that you keep telling yourself about yourself? If your self-perception is full of shame, regret, and negativity, as a life coach, in 7 minutes or less, I will teach you how to silence those inner voices and instead focus on the battles you've won, the lessons you've learned, and the strength that you've gained along the way. I was born and raised on the south side of Chicago. And if you've tuned into the news on any given day, then you know that there are certain parts of my city that are not the safest or the most beautiful. In fact, I grew up in a working class neighborhood that was infested with drugs and gangs and violence. My parents separated February 17th, 1986. I was 8 years old at the time. 9 years later, I gave birth to my first son. If you do the math, 8 plus 9 is 17. I became a mom, a teenage mom, at 17. And this became a defining moment for me. In fact, my story changed when I realized I needed to envision a new life for myself and my son. You know, the beauty in our story is that we have the power to change it. Like you, I've had my share of setbacks and disappointments. And to be perfectly honest with you, I used to think that being a black girl from the inner city, that I was set up to fail. That the odds, so I thought, were not in my favor. And then I had a revelation. I could face each adversity with an attitude of defeat, or I could face the woman in the mirror, reflect on my journey, and declare that my story was not over. What about for you? What if, instead of focusing on the pain and the hurt, what if you focused on the lessons it taught you? How it made you stronger? Changing our perspective is a good place to start in no longer allowing our circumstances to define us. Let's face it, there are just some things that are beyond our control, things that we cannot change, things that we did not deserve. After I had my son, a few months later, I got a job working at Dunkin' Donuts. And I worked the early morning shift, 4 a.m. My son was just a few months old, and my husband took care of him while I worked and watched the sun come up. We had no car, so I walked home every day. And I'll never forget a gentleman who slept on the front steps of this big, beautiful church. I often wondered, who was he? Where was his family? And what had happened in his life that led to the point where our stories connected? I never saw his face, and he never saw mine. Sometimes I left cash for him from the tips that I had earned that day. Sometimes I left warm breakfast sandwiches. You know, I did not have much to give, but I always gave something. You see, he wasn't just another character in my story. I never saw him as homeless. I saw him as a survivor, as a fighter, and I chose not to judge him. I recognize that there are certain parts of our story that we would rather not share. I understand. Realize that there is freedom in telling your story and that there is power in words. And if this applies to you, let me be the first to say, shame off you. Shame off you. What are the painful experiences that have shaped your perspective? I want to go back to my opening question. What is the story that you keep telling yourself about yourself? Because whatever it is that you keep telling yourself about yourself, know that you are always listening. Whether it is destructive or productive, you are always listening. I think about us as women, motherhood, marriage, work, family. We juggle it all. It is no wonder that data from the National Center for Health Statistics show that women are twice as likely as men to suffer from depression. Even in darkness and despair, listen to that still, small voice that says you are the hope. You're probably wondering, how can I change my story? How can I get started? And if you're stuck, here's how to move forward. This is what I call Toya's triad for change. The first phase is the acknowledgement phase. This is probably the hardest and where you will spend the most time. This is where you acknowledge what happened and accept what you cannot change. This will require you to look into the mirror of your soul, the good, the bad, and the ugly. Acknowledge and then accept. The second phase is the abandonment stage. This is where you say goodbye to the past. This is where you abandon the way you saw yourself in your story. You go from victim to victor. This is what I like to call the no blame and no shame phase. No more finger pointing, not at you and not at them. Abandon negative self-talk and embrace self-love. The final stage is the most exciting. It's the action stage. It is where you take action. Get help if you need it. Surrender to God. Use your voice to become an advocate for others. Share your story. Write a book. Start a blog. Go back to school, and if that's scary, start at a community college. Volunteer. This is where you will find and realize your purpose. For it is through your story that you will empower and inspire others to share their stories. Thank you.